The soft hum of the jet engines droned through Flight 2317 like the steady heartbeat of a sleeping giant, casting gentle vibrations across packed rows of passengers that had settled into the predictable rhythm of a red-eye flight from Chicago to San Francisco. Olivia Brenner had folded herself into seat 12A, her tall, slender frame awkwardly tucked against the window, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested practicality over style. The thick-rimmed reading glasses perched on her nose made her green eyes look larger, more focused. She always traveled with noise-canceling headphones that created her own bubble of focus, allowing her to work through the endless stack of intelligence reports that filled her laptop. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The other passengers called her the laptop lady. She moved through airports like a phantom, appearing at boarding gates exactly 45 minutes before departure, then disappearing into her digital world once seated. During in-flight announcements, Olivia rarely looked up. She never joined conversations about travel plans or destination recommendations, just nodded politely if addressed and returned to her screen. Her fellow passengers in business class seemed to take pleasure in speculating about her. Probably some corporate lawyer billing hours at 30,000 feet. The businessman in 12B would whisper to his colleague, "Brenner, you might want to look out the window. Best view of the Rockies you'll ever see." Or, "Brenner, the flight attendant asked if you wanted chicken or pasta." The kind of casual interruptions that punctuated the tedious routine of air travel. The flight attendants would joke behind her back, "She can work through anything because she's wearing those fancy headphones." Like having a human computer on board. They laughed, but Olivia had heard worse. She'd learned to tune out the casual dismissals, the way people looked right through her during security screenings. But Olivia had developed a strange routine that puzzled everyone on her regular flights. Every time she flew, she requested seat 12A specifically. Not 11A or 13A, only 12A would do. She'd politely refuse upgrades to first class, even when her frequent flyer status entitled her to them. She carefully recorded flight paths, crew rotations, and aircraft maintenance schedules in a worn leather notebook. She checked for variations in routing, documented any changes in the airline security protocols as if she was monitoring a patient in critical condition. Once a flight attendant caught her making careful notes about the emergency exit configurations. "Ms. Brenner, is everything all right with your seat?" She looked up, her green eyes reflecting the cabin lights. "I'm documenting inconsistencies in the emergency evacuation protocols across different aircraft in the fleet. This 737-800 has slight variations from standard procedures that could cause confusion in an actual emergency." The flight attendant shrugged and moved on, but something in Olivia's voice made her pause. There was a weight to her words, a certainty that didn't match her quiet demeanor. That night, as Flight 2317 crossed the Colorado Rockies, Olivia sat staring at a photograph she kept in her wallet. A woman who looked remarkably like her stood beside an FBI Academy graduating class, her arm around a young girl with the same green eyes and determined expression. On the back, in faded ink, "For my brave girl who will someday show the world that preparation defeats panic every time." She opened her leather notebook and made her nightly entry. Flight 2317, Day 1247. Systems appear stable. Crew rotations consistent with protocol. Waiting for the signs. Something was coming. Olivia could feel it in the slight turbulence that rattled the cabin, in the way her mother's old training manuals seemed to whisper secrets she was finally ready to hear. 8 years was a long time to wait, but some promises were worth keeping. The next flight would bring changes that would shake the aviation security world to its foundation. But tonight, Olivia Brenner was still just a passenger in 12, invisible to everyone except the sleeping aircraft that held her mother's greatest fear. The hijacking attempt began at 35,000 feet over Nebraska, exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes into Flight 2317's journey across the American heartland. The first signs were subtle, a flight attendant's hand trembling as she collected trash, the captain's voice on the intercom slightly higher pitched than normal, announcing unexpected turbulence, asking everyone to return to their seats. Olivia noticed immediately. After 1,247 flights meticulously documenting every normal pattern of commercial aviation, the abnormalities stood out like screens in a library. She closed her laptop, removed her headphones, and began carefully observing the cabin dynamics. Two men in the middle section had stopped their casual conversation and were now sitting rigidly, eyes constantly scanning the aircraft. A third man near the rear lavatory hadn't moved in 45 minutes, his hand never leaving the inside pocket of his jacket. Flight attendants were clustered near the forward galley, their practiced smiles replaced with tight lips and whispered conversations. Computer systems throughout the aircraft were behaving strangely. Seatback screens flickered. Wi-Fi connectivity dropped repeatedly. The cabin temperature fluctuated unpredictably. Security protocols were being systematically dismantled by someone with intimate knowledge of the aircraft systems. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reynolds stared at his secure phone in confusion as he arrived at the FBI's Aviation Security Command Center in Virginia. "What's the situation with Flight 2317? He muttered, scrolling through the rapidly updating threat assessment. "Sir, we've confirmed 3 hijackers are on board. They've somehow bypassed the cockpit security protocols and gained partial control of the aircraft's communication systems. They're demanding the release of prisoners from federal custody and $50 million, or they'll crash the aircraft." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Within minutes, teams of specialists were monitoring the situation. Fighter jets were scrambled to intercept the aircraft, and emergency protocols were activated across multiple federal agencies. Olivia watched from seat 12A as the cabin crew struggled to maintain calm while clearly following hijacking response procedures. "The entire aircraft is compromised," announced Senior Air Marshal Thompson after assessing the situation remotely. "The hijackers have access to systems we didn't even know were vulnerable. They're threatening to depressurize the cabin if their demands aren't met." FBI Special Agent Sarah Wilson brought in specialists from 3 different intelligence divisions. "We could try to talk them down, but the situation is deteriorating quickly. Command won't authorize a forced landing. Too risky with 183 civilians on board." Olivia continued sitting quietly in 12A, her eyes noting every detail, her mind calculating variables that others couldn't see. When Thompson declared the situation critical with minimal options, she felt something break inside her chest. That evening, as the plane maintained its holding pattern over Nebraska farmland, Olivia overheard the lead flight attendant talking quietly to another crew member. "Central Command is saying we're running out of fuel and options. They're considering worst-case scenarios. 8 years of careful observation, 8 years of waiting." Her mother's warnings about aviation security vulnerabilities was about to end with 183 people dying if she didn't act. After the cabin lights dimmed for an emergency power conservation measure, motion sensors in the cockpit detected someone approaching the secured door. Security cameras captured Olivia walking purposefully toward the cockpit, carrying her standard travel bag and the leather notebook she used for her meticulous records. She approached the senior flight attendant. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge of the FBI response team. Now." "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We're handling the situation." With steady hands, Olivia removed a small credential wallet. from her bag that the flight attendant had never seen during Olivia's 1,247 previous flights. Dr. Olivia Brenner, FBI Aviation Security Consultant. That man in 34 Celsius is not part of the hijacking team. He's panicking and could endanger others. The real threat is coming from the two men in row 22 and the one by the rear lavatory. They've implemented a systematic override of the aircraft's communication and navigation systems. The flight attendant stared in shock as Olivia continued. The aircraft has an emergency override system that was installed after 9/11s, but isn't in any of the public manuals. I need to speak to whoever is coordinating the response immediately. Within minutes, Olivia was connected to the emergency response team via secure satellite phone. This is Brenner. Authentication code Sierra Echo Charlie 7794. You need to patch me through to Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds immediately. Alarms began blaring in the FBI Aviation Security Command Center as her authentication code triggered high-level security protocols. Reynolds took the call personally, his face showing not anger, but something that looked almost like relief. "How did you know about this flight?" he asked simply. Olivia looked around the galley where crew members watched her in stunned silence. "Because my mother designed the security system they're currently breaking into. 8 years ago, she warned the Bureau that someone would eventually find the vulnerability in the redundant communications array. Nobody listened. The investigation that would follow would uncover secrets that had been buried in classified archives. But for now, Olivia Brenner was no longer invisible. She had just proven that the quiet ones, the ones everyone overlooks, might be the only ones who can see the patterns hidden in plain sight. The interrogation room in the FBI's field office in Omaha was windowless and cold, designed to make people uncomfortable. Olivia sat across from Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds and a woman she didn't recognize, someone in a tailored suit with the kind of sharp eyes that suggested high-level intelligence work. "Dr. Brenner," the woman began, sliding a thick folder across the metal table. "I'm Director Elizabeth Foster, National Security Division. We need to understand how you knew what was happening on that aircraft." Olivia remained calm, her hands folded in her lap. 8 years of watching and waiting had taught her patience. Reynolds opened the folder and spread out documents: security clearances, personnel files, photographs. "Catherine Brenner, your mother, former lead designer for the Integrated Aircraft Security Systems program. She designed the post-9/11's emergency protocols that are still in use today." He looked up. "Care to explain why you never mentioned this connection during your 1,247 flights?" "Nobody ever asked, sir." Director Foster leaned forward. "Your mother was removed from the program in 2015. Official reason: insubordination and excessive security concerns deemed paranoid by her superiors. Unofficial reason: she created documentation about vulnerabilities that made her superiors very nervous." Olivia's jaw tightened. For 8 years, she'd heard her mother called paranoid, a security risk, a woman who couldn't function under pressure. The whispers had followed her through her own doctoral program in cybersecurity, through her consulting work, into the shadows of Seat 12A. "She wasn't paranoid," Olivia said quietly. "We're beginning to understand that," Reynolds replied. "The hijacking attempt today, they exploited exactly the vulnerability your mother documented 8 years ago. The one our security teams dismissed as theoretically impossible. How much did she tell you?" Olivia looked at the photograph in the folder. Her mother in her FBI uniform, young and proud before the security concerns destroyed her career. "She told me that blind spots shouldn't be ignored just because acknowledging them is inconvenient." Over the next 3 hours, they walked through her mother's final months on the project. How she'd grown increasingly concerned about specific vulnerabilities in the aircraft security systems. How she'd documented protocols that only her daughter would someday understand. How she'd been quietly dismissed and relegated to teaching basic security procedures until her retirement. She spent her last years training airport screeners, Olivia said, her voice carrying 8 years of suppressed anger. The woman who designed the most advanced aircraft security interface ever created, and they had her watching passengers take off their shoes. Director Foster made notes. And you? How long have you been monitoring flights? Since the day my mother died. 8 years of documenting patterns. 8 years of watching for the vulnerability to be exploited while everyone else dismissed her concerns. Reynolds studied her personal file. Your employers describe you as brilliant but detached. Quiet. Works independently. Minimal team integration. He looked up. They had no idea what you were really doing, did they? People see what they expect to see, Colonel. A woman with a laptop must be just another workaholic. That evening, Olivia was moved to a secure facility outside Omaha, a clear upgrade from the airport hotel where passengers had been taken after the emergency landing. She knew it was as much about security as comfort. They needed to keep her close while they figured out what to do with her mother's legacy. Through her window, she could see the lights of Eppley Airfield in the distance. Flight 2317 was still. On the tarmac, surrounded by federal agents and technical specialists, documenting every aspect of the thwarted hijacking. Teams of experts were analyzing the security breaches, trying to understand what Olivia Brenner had warned about 8 years before. She opened her leather notebook and wrote, Day 1248. The vulnerability has been exposed. Mom would be vindicated. But disappointed, it took an actual attempt. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Reynolds stood in the doorway looking older than he had that morning. Dr. Brenner, I owe you an apology. We've been going through your mother's sealed files, the warnings she issued, the specific vulnerabilities she identified. She was right about everything. We weren't willing to acknowledge the flaws in systems we had certified as impenetrable. Olivia closed her notebook. And now, sir? Now we have a choice. We can patch this single vulnerability and pretend the larger issues don't exist. Or we can honor your mother's vision and completely rethink our approach to aviation security. He handed her a security badge, blue with silver lettering, the kind reserved for special access consultants. The FBI director wants to speak with you tomorrow morning. Dr. Brenner, your mother's work needs to be implemented fully, not piecemeal. And we need someone who understands not just the technical specifications, but the philosophy behind them. Olivia held the badge, feeling its weight. 8 years of watching, of being invisible, of keeping faith with a promise made to her dying mother. Tomorrow would bring the vindication that would change aviation security forever, but tonight she was still Olivia Brenner's daughter, ready to prove that some warnings are too important to ignore. The briefing room at FBI headquarters was packed with more brass than Olivia had ever seen in one place. Deputy directors, intelligence officers, and aviation security specialists filled every seat, all eyes focused on the tall woman in a simple navy suit standing beside a wall of technical displays. FBI Director James Hartman himself had flown in from a G7 summit. Dr. Brenner, what we're about to discuss has been classified at the highest levels. Your mother's work went far beyond conventional security design. The lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life, showing laboratory footage from 2015. Olivia watched her mother, younger and more determined, working alongside teams of engineers and cybersecurity experts. Project Guardian, Hartman continued. Your mother wasn't just creating security protocols. She was developing the first true integrated approach to aviation security, a system that anticipated threats rather than just responding to known risks. The video showed Olivia as a graduate student, maybe 22 years old, participating in what looked like simulation exercises. Her mother supervised as she identified potential security breaches, solved complex system infiltration problems, and developed countermeasures for theoretical threats. Olivia's hands trembled as she recognized the sessions. She told me we were just gaming scenarios for my dissertation. Every session was recorded, analyzed, and integrated into the Guardian protocols, Director Foster explained. Your problem solving methods, your ability to identify patterns, your intuitive understanding of security vulnerabilities, all of it became part of the system architecture that your mother was developing. The screen changed to show threat assessment data, complex algorithms, and security architectures that looked more like living organisms than engineering schematics. Director Hartman leaned forward. Dr. Brenner, your mother wasn't just designing protocols to respond to threats. She was creating a predictive security framework that could anticipate vulnerabilities before they were exploited. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Olivia stared at the data, understanding for the first time why her mother had been so secretive, so protective of her work. The Bureau wanted a better mousetrap, she said quietly. She gave them something else entirely. She gave the world, a security paradigm that could evolve ahead of threats, Hartman confirmed. They shut down her project because they realized it challenged the fundamental assumptions of our entire approach to aviation security. Dr. Nicholas Hargrove, a civilian security consultant, pulled up additional data. The Guardian system doesn't just create static barriers. Dr. Brenner, according to your mother's notes, it anticipates adaptive threats by constantly evolving its own protocols. It's the first security framework designed to stay ahead of emerging exploitation techniques rather than merely responding to known threats. Reynolds stood up. Which brings us to why you're here. The hijacking attempt on Flight 2317 wasn't random. Our intelligence suggests it was a test run, a proof of concept for a much larger coordinated attack being planned across multiple airlines and international flights. Your biometric data, your pattern recognition skills, your understanding of your mother's work, they're the key to fully implementing Guardian before these attacks can be launched. Director Foster added, without you, we're just placing more fingers in an increasingly leaky dam. They showed her technical specifications that made her mother's genius clear. Adaptive security protocols that adjusted to emerging threat patterns, integrated systems that communicated across previously siloed security domains, predictive modeling that anticipated vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. There's something else, Director Foster said, pulling up a final document. Your mother left detailed instructions in case her concerns were ever validated by an actual attempt. The screen showed a handwritten note in her mother's familiar script. The Guardian protocol can only be fully activated by implementing the complete integrated framework. If anyone attempts to apply partial solutions or isolated patches, the system will fail to provide the comprehensive protection it was designed to deliver. This technology must serve the traveling public, not just create the illusion of safety. Olivia felt the weight of 8 years pressing down on her. Her mother hadn't just identified vulnerabilities. She'd built a comprehensive solution with her daughter as the final safeguard. What happens if I refuse? She asked. Director Hartman's expression was grave. Then we continue applying band-aids to a fundamentally flawed system, and we wait for the next attempt to succeed. And if I agree, then you help us implement technology that could transform aviation security worldwide. But Dr. Brenner, I won't lie to you. This won't be just a consulting position. If the Guardian system performs as your mother intended, you'll be proving that security can be proactive rather than reactive. The implications go far beyond aviation applications. Olivia looked around the room at all the expectant faces, generals and directors all waiting for her decision. But in her mind, she saw her mother's workshop, heard her voice explaining that every security system had a philosophical core if you knew how to find it. When do we start? She asked. The room erupted in relieved murmurs, but Olivia barely heard them. Tomorrow morning, she would step into her mother's greatest creation and discover whether 8 years of faith had been justified. Outside, Flight 2317's passengers were being rebooked onto new flights, unaware that their routine journey had been the catalyst for a security revolution that would transform aviation safety forever. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the FBI's Advanced Technology Division as Olivia walked through security checkpoints toward the Guardian lab. Dozens of personnel watched from behind workstations, their faces a mixture of curiosity and respect. The lab had been quietly maintained since her mother's dismissal, the equipment gathering dust while the aviation industry continued implementing partial solutions to emerging threats. As Olivia approached the main security console, something extraordinary happened. The systems began activating automatically, recognizing her biometric signature from 50 feet away. Authentication protocols ran self-diagnostics without being commanded. Security frameworks performed integrity checks, and the main display illuminated with a soft blue glow, as if the system was awakening after a long sleep. Biometric profile validated, announced Dr. Hargrove from the monitoring station. The system is responding to your presence from across the room. It's like it knows you. When Olivia placed her palm on the primary authentication scanner, the central interface came fully online with a soft electronic hum. The workstation adjusted to her exact height settings that hadn't been programmed by the current technical team. As she settled into the chair, the display screens repositioned themselves at optimal viewing angles, and the interface seemed to mold itself to her working preferences. Identity confirmed, announced the Guardian system in a voice that was unmistakably modeled after her mother's. Pattern recognition protocols engaged. Welcome home, Olivia. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. After 8 years, she was finally continuing her mother's work. Command, this is Guardian Actual, she said into her headset, using the designation that felt as natural as breathing. All systems show green. Requesting permission to begin full implementation protocols. Guardian Actual, you are cleared to proceed. Good luck, Dr. Brenner. The Guardian system began integrating with active aviation security frameworks with a fluidity that defied conventional cybersecurity principles. Within seconds, Olivia understood why her mother's work had frightened aviation security leadership. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a fundamental reimagining of how security should function. For 12 hours and 37 minutes, Olivia and the Guardian system performed security framework implementations that redefined what aviation protection could achieve. Predictive threat modeling that anticipated vulnerabilities before they emerged. Adaptive security protocols that evolved in response to changing tactics. Integrated communication systems that eliminated the silos between different security domains. But more than raw performance, the system was learning in real time. Every decision Olivia made, every intuitive security adjustment, every moment of pattern recognition was being recorded, analyzed, and integrated into the system's growing understanding of optimal security architecture. This is unprecedented. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds radioed from the monitoring center. The security frameworks we're implementing, they're not just blocking known threats. They're anticipating exploitation vectors that haven't even been developed yet. Olivia felt the system's architecture merging with her own thought patterns. When she imagined a potential security vulnerability, Guardian began developing countermeasures before she articulated the concern. When she sensed a potential weak point in the framework, the system adjusted its protective measures to reinforce it. When she felt the instinctive need to modify authentication protocols, the system responded as if it could read her mind. Guardian Actual, your implementation parameters are exceeding all projected benchmarks, Director Foster reported. How are you achieving these integration rates? Olivia smiled, finally understanding what her mother had tried to explain all those years ago. We're not just implementing security, Director. We're thinking ahead of the threats. As she brought the first phase of Guardian online across 3 major airports, the system performed flawlessly, integrating with existing frameworks while significantly enhancing their capabilities. When the initial 12-hour implementation window closed and the teams prepared for the next phase, Olivia sat at the console for a long moment, feeling the system settling into its operational mode like a contented sigh. Director Hartman was the first to approach her as she stepped away from the workstation. 8 years ago, we shelved this program because we were afraid of what it represented. Today, you've shown us that we weren't afraid of the technology. We were afraid of acknowledging how vulnerable we really were. The implementation data revealed something that would change aviation security forever. The Guardian system had been analyzing and integrating every microsecond of the implementation, building an ever more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between human intuition and predictive security frameworks. But as Olivia walked away from the command center, she noticed something that made her pause. The Guardian system remained partially active, as if reluctant to fully disengage from her presence. For the first time in 8 years, it had experienced true integration, not just theoretical modeling but collaborative implementation. That night, she made a final entry in her leather notebook. Day 1249. We implemented the first phase together. Mom, just like you always said we would. The system remembers everything now. Your vision is finally alive. Tomorrow would bring decisions about the future of the program, about recognition and opportunity she'd never imagined. But tonight, Olivia Brenner was simply a daughter who had finally vindicated her mother's warnings. The Guardian system sat in its secure server farm, databases humming quietly, filled with memories from 12 hours and 37 minutes of perfect human-machine security integration. For the first time since 2015, the system was truly awake, and it was learning. The FBI moved fast once they understood what they had. Within 48 hours of Olivia's initial implementation, the Guardian program was classified at the highest levels and reassigned to a joint task force combining FBI aviation security, Department of Homeland Security, and civilian aviation authorities. Olivia found herself at the center of a whirlwind of meetings, briefings, and security assessments. Officials she'd never seen before knew intimate details of her life. Government contractors offered consulting positions that would set her up for life. Everyone wanted to understand how she'd achieved what their experts couldn't. Dr. Brenner, Director Hartman began during what felt like her 100th briefing. We're prepared to offer you immediate appointment as Special Director of the newly reactivated Guardian program with full operational authority and a dedicated team of specialists. The conference room was full of people taking notes, recording her responses, analyzing her every word. After 8 years of being invisible in seat 12A, the sudden attention was overwhelming. We're talking about the opportunity to lead the most advanced aviation security program in federal history, Hartman continued. Recognition that would vindicate your mother's work worldwide. The chance to revolutionize not just airline security, but transportation safety, border protection, critical infrastructure defense, applications we haven't even imagined yet. Director Foster slid a document across the table. The compensation package would be substantial. 7 figures annually, plus implementation bonuses, plus a percentage of any civilian applications developed from your mother's technology. Olivia stared at the contract without reading it. Everything she'd ever dreamed of was being offered to her: respect, recognition, the resources to implement her mother's work on a scale she'd never imagined possible. But that night, alone in her temporary quarters at the secure facility, she called her father, the only family she had left after her mother's death. They want to make me famous, Dad, she explained after describing the day's events. They want to put my face on security briefings and turn Mom's work into a federal showcase. And what do you want? Michael Brenner asked, his voice carrying the quiet wisdom of a man who had watched his wife's career destroyed by the same organization now courting his daughter. Olivia looked out her window toward the distant lights of the airport, where regular flights were taking off and landing, passengers blissfully unaware of the vulnerabilities that had nearly claimed 183 lives. I want to finish what Mom started, but I want to do it right. The next morning, Olivia made a decision that shocked everyone in the briefing room. I appreciate the offer, she told the assembled officials and contractors, but I declined the position as currently structured. Director Hartman leaned forward. Dr. Brenner, I'm not sure you understand the magnitude of what we're offering. I understand perfectly, sir. But I didn't expose these vulnerabilities to become a figurehead. I did it to prove that my mother wasn't paranoid or insubordinate. She was a visionary who believed that security should anticipate threats, not just respond to them. She stood up, feeling more confident than she had in years. I'll accept a position as senior technical consultant to the Guardian program, but I have 3 non-negotiable conditions. The room fell silent as she continued. First, my mother receives full posthumous recognition and restoration of her credentials and reputation. Second, Guardian must be implemented as an integrated system, not dismantled into separate components that various agencies can cherry-pick. And third, I maintain veto authority over any application of this technology that prioritizes convenience or cost saving over genuine security. Director Foster began to object, but Hartman raised his hand, stopping her. Your conditions are reasonable, Dr. Brenner. Catherine deserves her vindication, and the technology deserves to be implemented properly. Is there anything else? Olivia nodded. Yes, I want to remain anonymous to the public. No press conferences, no congressional testimonies, no public recognition. The work speaks for itself. The room erupted in protests and counteroffers, but Olivia had made up her mind. Fame and accolades weren't what her mother had envisioned when she designed Guardian to protect the traveling public. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds followed her into the hallway. Olivia, you're walking away from a chance to be the face of aviation security for a generation. No, sir. I'm choosing how I want to honor my mother's legacy. 3 days later, Catherine Brenner's personnel file was quietly updated, her security clearance posthumously restored, and her warnings about systemic vulnerabilities officially acknowledged in internal FBI documents. A small ceremony was held at FBI headquarters, where Director Hartman personally apologized to Michael Brenner for the treatment his wife had received. Meanwhile, Olivia began the painstaking work of properly implementing the Guardian system. She assembled a team of specialists who understood the philosophy behind the technology, that security shouldn't just create barriers, but should anticipate how those barriers might be circumvented. My mother used to say that security isn't about building walls, she explained to her team during their first meeting. It's about understanding why someone would want to climb them in the first place. The Guardian program continued under her technical guidance, with Reynolds handling the administrative and political aspects. Other security experts were trained on simplified versions of the system. The technology was adapted and refined, eventually making its way into protocols at major airports around the world. Olivia watched from her modest office as teams of analysts and engineers came and went, all working to understand and implement what she and her mother had envisioned together. She felt no regret about her decisions. She had vindicated her mother's reputation and ensured her work would protect millions of travelers. That was enough. 3 weeks after declining the director position, Olivia was reviewing implementation reports when Director Foster approached her workstation. You could still change your mind, Foster said, leaning against the doorframe. The higher-ups are asking for you specifically. They say the system isn't being implemented with the same vision when you're not directly involved. Olivia looked up from her work, her reading glasses reflecting the office lights. Guardian doesn't need me anymore, Director. It has learned what it needs to know. Now it can teach others to think ahead rather than just react. That night, she made another entry in the leather notebook. The system remembers. The vision lives on. My work here is changing. But sometimes, late at night when the facility was quiet, Olivia would walk past the main Guardian interface, the screens glowing with activity as the system continued learning, adapting, evolving. In that quiet space, she could still feel the echo of her mother's presence and the hum of a security framework that had finally learned to anticipate rather than just respond. 6 months after the thwarted hijacking attempt on Flight 2317, the Guardian technology began appearing in ways that transformed security practices far beyond aviation. The adaptive threat modeling that Olivia Brenner had pioneered was being integrated into border security systems, allowing agents to identify suspicious patterns before they manifested as actual threats. Transportation hubs use simplified versions of the Guardian protocols to manage passenger flow and security screening with unprecedented efficiency. Major sporting events and public gatherings were protected by security systems that could identify potential issues before they developed. Olivia watched these developments from her consulting position, feeling a quiet satisfaction that her mother's vision was finally reaching its true potential. She continued her advisory work, reviewing implementation plans, troubleshooting integration issues, maintaining the philosophical core of Guardian, while allowing it to evolve beyond its original applications. The security community itself had changed. Officials who had once dismissed Olivia Brenner's warnings now cited her work in their own research. Young security specialists approached Olivia for guidance, treating her as a mentor rather than just a technical consultant. The story of the quiet passenger who had prevented a catastrophic hijacking had spread throughout the intelligence community, though Olivia's identity remained protected as she had requested. But Olivia noticed something troubling in the classified reports that crossed her desk. Guardian wasn't being implemented consistently across all security domains. Some agencies were adopting the technology but stripping away its predictive components. Returning to the reactive security model that Catherine had fought against, Dr. Hargrove visited her one evening as she was finishing her daily review. "We need to talk," he said quietly. They walked to an empty conference room, the space feeling hollow now that the initial excitement of the program had settled into routine implementation. "The system isn't being used the way your mother intended," Hargrove said. "Oh, it's working beautifully in the aviation sector, performing all the standard security functions we've programmed into it. But that predictive capability, that ability to anticipate threats before they materialize, we haven't been able to maintain it across broader applications." Olivia wasn't surprised. "My mother designed it as an integrated system, Doctor. The predictive modeling, the pattern recognition, the adaptive responses, they're all interdependent. You can't cherry-pick components without compromising the whole. We've tried replicating the integration success you achieved in those first 12 hours. We've run the implementation protocols exactly as documented. Nothing works the same way." Hargrove pulled out a tablet showing security performance data. Guardian is still revolutionary technology, but without that deeper integration. It's just a very sophisticated security system, not the transformative framework your mother envisioned. Olivia studied the data, seeing the difference immediately. The security protocols were technically sound but lacked the organic adaptation, the intuitive evolution that had characterized her initial implementation. "What are you asking me?" "Doctor, the program is expanding. We're building integrated security frameworks for critical infrastructure, government facilities, even public transportation systems, each one incorporating lessons learned from your mother's original design. But we need someone who understands the technology, not just as a consultant, but as Olivia Brenner's daughter." Hargrove handed her a new proposal, not a directorship or public position this time, but something different. Implementation architect. You'd work directly with design teams, help them understand how to create security systems, that anticipate threats rather than just respond to them. No publicity, no media attention, just the essential work of making sure your mother's vision is properly realized. Olivia considered the offer. It would mean taking a more active role in Guardian's evolution, guiding its implementation rather than just advising from a distance. But it would also mean ensuring that her mother's vision was fulfilled correctly, that her security philosophy served the public rather than just creating the illusion of protection. I need time to think. That night, Olivia visited her mother's grave for the first time since the funeral 8 years before. The simple headstone bore only her name, dates, and the words, "She saw what others couldn't." Olivia traced the letters with her finger, remembering her mother's voice. Security should protect people live, not just make them feel protected. Never forget the difference. The next morning, she gave Dr. Hargrove her answer. "I'll accept the position, but I maintain my anonymity. The people implementing these systems need to understand that security isn't about recognition. It's about anticipating what others miss." Over the following months, Olivia divided her time between consulting on high-level security, implementations, and personally guiding the integration of Guardian across critical systems. She developed training protocols that emphasize predictive security modeling rather than just threat response. She advised on interface modifications that made Guardian more adaptable to emerging threats across different security domains. Most importantly, she insisted that every security specialist working with the system understand its philosophical foundation before attempting to implement its technical components. You can't truly protect people until you understand how threats evolve, she told each new class of security implementers. And threats evolve by finding the gaps we haven't anticipated. Learn to see the gaps before they're exploited, and you've changed the entire security paradigm. The program flourished under her guidance. Security specialists began achieving deeper integration with the Guardian framework, not matching Olivia's unique connection with the original system, but developing their own approaches to predictive security modeling. A year after the thwarted hijacking, Olivia received a letter that would change everything again. It was addressed simply to Dr. Brenner and bore the seal of the National Security Agency. Inside was an invitation and a photograph of a sleek new building on their campus, the Catherine Brenner Center for Predictive Security Studies. But more than the honor of seeing her mother's name officially recognized, the letter contained a personal note from the NSA director. "We would like you to help design the curriculum for the next generation of security specialists, so they understand that the most important breakthroughs often come from those willing to see vulnerabilities that others ignore." Olivia smiled, thinking of her mother's warnings, of 8 years spent watching for the patterns others missed, of 12 hours and 37 minutes of implementation that had changed security philosophy forever. She had one more contribution to make. The NSA's training facility gleamed under the Maryland morning sun as Olivia walked up the steps carrying a leather notebook that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. Inside, a new class of security specialists waited to learn the principles of predictive threat modeling that Catherine Brenner had pioneered. The lecture hall was state-of-the-art, with advanced simulation capabilities and integrated learning systems. Students from across intelligence and security agencies filled the seats, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and respect as Olivia was introduced not as a hero or director, but simply as Dr. Brenner, implementation architect. An ESA Deputy Director Wilson had asked her to develop a foundational course that would preserve the human element behind the technological framework. "Dr. Brenner, thank you for coming. These specialists represent our future security leadership. They need to understand not just how Guardian works, but why it matters." Olivia spent the morning explaining her mother's security philosophy, not the technical specifications or classified details, but the fundamental truth behind the system. She spoke of a woman who believed that security should anticipate human behavior rather than just react to it. She described 8 years of quiet observation, of maintaining vigilance when everyone else had dismissed the warnings as paranoia. People always ask me how I knew what to look for on Flight 2317, she said to the room of attentive students. But that's not the real question. The real question is, how do you keep watching for something for 8 years when the whole world tells you it doesn't exist? She paused, looking across the faces of the future security leaders. My mother once told me that every threat has patterns if you know how to listen for them. I spent 8 years in seat 1-2, listening for those patterns, waiting for the moment when they would reveal themselves. That moment came not because I was special, but because I was patient. When the lecture ended, Olivia walked back through the building that bore her mother's name. A group of young specialists followed her, eager for more insights into the security framework they were training to implement. How did you know the hijackers would target that specific flight? One young woman asked, her intense focus reminding Olivia of herself at that age. Olivia knelt down to open her briefcase, removing a worn diagram her mother had created years before. The patterns were there all along. The flight path, the crew rotation schedule, the aircraft maintenance history, all created a unique vulnerability profile that appeared repeatedly in my mother's modeling. The key wasn't just seeing the patterns, but understanding what they revealed about the underlying security architecture. An older student raised his hand. Are you going to continue implementing Guardian yourself? Olivia smiled. I'm a consultant. I help others see what might be missed. That's not famous work, it's just necessary. But you prevented a hijacking and transformed aviation security in 12 hours and 37 minutes. Another student insisted. I spent 8 years preparing for those 12 hours, Olivia confirmed. The implementation was the easy part. The hard part was maintaining vigilance when everyone else had stopped looking. After the students moved on to their next class, Olivia stood alone in the atrium of the building named for her mother. She placed her palm against the commemorative plaque, feeling the cool metal that bore Catherine Brenner's name and accomplishments. A security officer approached nervously. Ma'am, visitors aren't supposed to touch the displays. It's okay, Marcus, the deputy director interrupted. This is Dr. Brenner. Her mother's work is the reason we're all here. The officer's expression changed to one of recognition and respect. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize. It's fine, Olivia said, removing her hand from the plaque. Rules are rules, even for old memories. As she prepared to leave, Wilson found her examining the building security systems with a critical eye. How did the lecture go? He asked. I hope it helps them understand that technology alone is never enough. The real story was never about the Guardian system, Olivia replied. The real story is about a mother who saw vulnerabilities others refused to acknowledge, and a daughter who refused to let those warnings go unheeded. Wilson handed her a small envelope. This came for you this morning. No return address, but it passed through our security screening. Olivia opened the envelope to find a simple thank you card signed by the flight attendants and pilots from Flight 2317. Dr. Brenner, we never got to properly thank you that day in Nebraska. We didn't understand then what you had prevented. A year later, we do. Thank you for seeing what the rest of us missed. The crew of Flight 2317. Olivia felt tears welling in her eyes. This was why she'd chosen to remain anonymous, to work quietly in the background while others implemented the systems. The real impact wasn't in headlines or awards. It was in the lives that continued because someone had been willing to watch and wait and act when the moment came. That evening, Olivia flew back to Chicago, returning to her apartment near the university where she now taught advanced courses in predictive security modeling. The next morning, she would begin working with a new team developing Guardian applications for public transportation systems. starting another day of ensuring that security wasn't just reactive but truly anticipatory. But as she unpacked her things, she found a message waiting on her phone. It was from Director Hartman. "Olivia, I thought you should know. The Guardian implementations have exceeded all projections. Aviation incidents are down 73% worldwide. The training programs you developed for security specialists are being adopted across 5 continents. Your mother's vision is becoming reality on a scale we never imagined. The Catherine Brenner Foundation for Predictive Security has been established, with an initial endowment of $50 million. Your father will serve as honorary chairman if you approve." Olivia smiled, thinking of her mother working late in her home office, warning about vulnerabilities that others couldn't see, dreaming of security systems that could anticipate threats rather than just respond to them. She opened her leather notebook and made her final entry. Day 1647. The work continues. Mom's vision is alive in ways she never could have imagined. Guardian protects millions of travelers every day, but its real power is in changing how we think about security itself. I'm still just a consultant, but I've learned that the most important job in the world is keeping other people's warnings from being forgotten. She closed the notebook and placed it on her nightstand next to the photograph of her mother. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new systems to implement, new threats to anticipate through careful, patient work in offices and classrooms around the world. The technology that Catherine Brenner had pioneered was opening new frontiers in security applications around the world. Airport screening systems now identified potential threats before passengers even reached security checkpoints. Public transportation hubs operated with unprecedented safety protocols that adapted in real time to changing conditions. Government facilities used Guardian-based systems to manage access control with a sophistication that made previous methods seem primitive by comparison. But in the quiet lecture halls of Northwestern University, Olivia Brenner continued the work that had always mattered most to her, teaching the next generation of security specialists to see patterns that others missed. Her advanced seminars on predictive threat analysis became legendary among graduate students, not for their technical complexity, but for the philosophical foundation she instilled in every future analyst. Security isn't about building perfect barriers, she would tell each new class. It's about understanding human behavior well enough to anticipate how those barriers will be tested. 3 years after the thwarted hijacking of Flight 2317, Olivia's life had found a new rhythm. 4 days a week, she taught at Northwestern, mentoring promising students who showed an aptitude for pattern recognition. The other 3 days, she consulted with the Guardian implementation team, ensuring that each new application of her mother's technology maintained the core principle of anticipatory protection rather than mere reaction. On a crisp autumn morning, Olivia was reviewing student analyses when Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the university's Dean of Engineering, appeared in her doorway. "You have a visitor," Mitchell said, her expression a mixture of surprise and reverence. "The President's National Security Advisor is waiting in the conference room." Olivia closed her laptop with a sigh. She had deliberately maintained her low profile, avoiding Washington politics and the spotlight that would inevitably come with greater recognition. Her small office in the engineering building, with its views of Lake Michigan and shelves filled with security theory texts, was her sanctuary from the world of intelligence briefings and congressional oversight. Robert Keller, the National Security Advisor, rose as she entered the conference room. Unlike most high-ranking officials she'd met, he didn't immediately launch into pleasantries or attempt to impress her with his authority. "Dr. Brenner, thank you for seeing me without an appointment," he said simply. "We have a situation that requires your unique perspective." Over the next hour, Keller outlined a troubling pattern that had emerged across multiple critical infrastructure systems nationwide. Small anomalies, individually dismissed as glitches or maintenance issues, were appearing with increasing frequency in power grids, water treatment facilities, and transportation systems. Each incident appears isolated and benign, Keller explained, spreading data points across the conference table. But when viewed collectively, across multiple systems and timeframes, they form a pattern, Olivia finished for him, already seeing the connections. Someone's testing vulnerabilities systematically, staying just below detection thresholds. Keller nodded. Exactly. But none of our conventional analysis teams caught it. They're all focused on their specific security domains. It was actually the Guardian system at Chicago O'Hare that flagged the pattern first. It noticed unusual passenger movement patterns that correlated with power fluctuations in the terminal. The system is doing what my mother designed it to do, Olivia said quietly. Looking for connections that cross conventional boundaries. We need you to lead a special assessment team, Keller said. Not as a consultant or advisor, but as the one person who truly understands how to see across these artificial divisions we've created in our security architecture. Olivia's instinct was to refuse. She had built a life that honored her mother's legacy while allowing her to remain in the background, guiding rather than commanding. Mr. Keller, there are dozens of qualified analysts who could coordinate this assessment. There are plenty of people who understand security systems, Dr. Brenner, but there's only one person who understands security philosophy the way you do. This isn't about technical expertise, it's about perspective. That evening, Olivia stood at her apartment window, watching the lights of O'Hare Airport in the distance, planes taking off and landing in carefully choreographed patterns. Somewhere in that complex dance of technology and human judgment, Guardian was quietly watching, learning, anticipating, just as her mother had intended. She called her father, who had become chairman of the Catherine Brenner Foundation, overseeing scholarships for students pursuing careers in predictive security analysis. They want me to lead a national assessment team, Dad, she explained after outlining Keller's visit. Analyzing patterns across multiple infrastructure systems. Michael. Brenner was silent for a moment before responding. Your mother always said the most dangerous vulnerabilities are the ones that exist between systems, not within them. That's why I'm considering it. This is exactly the kind of interconnected threat she warned about. Just remember what Catherine always told her students: live. The patterns reveal the people behind them. Find the pattern, understand the motivation, and you've solved half the security challenge. The next morning, Olivia called Keller with her decision. 3 days later, she arrived at a nondescript government facility outside Washington, D.C., where a team of 20 specialists from various security domains had been assembled. The briefing room buzzed with whispered conversations as Olivia entered. Some of the analysts recognized her from academic conferences or implementation meetings, but many knew her only by reputation, the woman who had prevented a hijacking, by recognizing patterns everyone else had missed. Dr. Brenner will be coordinating our integrated analysis, Keller announced to the room. She brings a unique perspective that crosses traditional security boundaries. A senior analyst from the Department of Energy raised his hand immediately. With all due respect, my team has been monitoring power grid anomalies for months. We have advanced detection systems specifically designed for this purpose. Olivia nodded, acknowledging his expertise without challenging it. And those systems are excellent at detecting threats within the power infrastructure. But who's looking at the spaces between our systems? The connections and correlations that don't fit neatly into any single security domain. She walked to the central display and pulled up the data points Keller had shown her. Each of these incidents was classified as a minor anomaly within its respective system. Individually, they appear random and insignificant. With a few keystrokes, she rearranged the data points chronologically, then geographically, then by system type. Patterns began to emerge, subtle correlations that cross traditional boundaries between infrastructure systems. Now look at them collectively, she continued. There's a deliberate progression here, testing responses, gauging detection thresholds, identifying cross-system vulnerabilities that exist in the spaces between our separate security frameworks. The room fell silent as the analysts began to see what she was showing them. It wasn't just about power grid fluctuations or water system anomalies or transportation glitches. It was about the carefully orchestrated interplay between these systems, exploiting the fact that they were monitored and protected separately. This is why Guardian was designed as an integrated system, Olivia explained. Not just to protect individual domains, but to recognize patterns that cross those artificial boundaries we've created. Over the next 2 weeks, Olivia led the assessment team through a comprehensive analysis that broke down the silos between their respective expertise. Energy analysts worked alongside transportation specialists. Water system engineers collaborated with cybersecurity experts, each bringing their domain knowledge while Olivia helped them see the connections they'd been missing. We need to think like the people behind these probes, she told them during a late-night session. They're not just looking for weaknesses in individual systems, they're mapping the interconnections, the dependencies that exist between critical infrastructure components. Gradually, a disturbing picture emerged. The pattern of probes revealed a sophisticated attempt to map cascading failure points. Vulnerabilities where a disruption in one system could trigger failures across multiple infrastructure domains. Simultaneously, they're looking for the thread that unravels the entire fabric, Olivia explained to Keller during their daily briefing. A vulnerability chain that could trigger widespread infrastructure collapse with minimal effort. How close are they to finding it? Keller asked, his usual composure slipping slightly. Too close, Olivia replied. But there's something about the pattern that doesn't make sense. The progression is methodical but inconsistent in some areas, as if they're working from incomplete information or theoretical models rather than direct system knowledge. On the 17th day of the assessment, at 2:43 a.m., Olivia was reviewing data in the empty briefing room when something clicked. The pattern wasn't just revealing vulnerabilities, it was revealing the perspective of the people looking for them. She pulled up academic publications on critical infrastructure security from the past 5 years, focusing on theoretical models of cascading system failures. One paper in particular caught her attention: Interdependent Infrastructure Vulnerability Assessment, a theoretical framework published by the Eastern European Journal of Cybersecurity. The methodology described in the paper matched the pattern of probes they'd been tracking almost perfectly. By morning, she had identified 3 possible groups with both the capability and motivation to conduct such a systematic vulnerability assessment across U.S. infrastructure systems. The evidence pointed most strongly to a state-sponsored research institute operating under academic cover. When she presented her findings to the full assessment team and senior officials, the reaction was immediate and decisive. We need to harden the interconnection points between systems immediately, the Homeland Security representative said, and implement countermeasures to make their mapping efforts useless. That's the conventional response, Olivia said quietly. And it's exactly what they would expect us to do. The room fell silent as she continued. My mother always said that true security isn't just about building stronger walls. It's about changing the landscape so the walls become irrelevant. She walked to the display and brought up a new implementation plan. Instead of just hardening our current infrastructure connections, we need to implement dynamic interdependency routing, constantly changing the ways our critical systems interact and depend on each other. Not just better protection, but evolving architecture. The next month was a blur of implementation meetings, security briefings, and system redesigns. Olivia worked closely with teams across multiple agencies, helping them understand not just the technical requirements, but the philosophical shift required to move from static security to dynamic security architecture. We're not just protecting what we have, she explained repeatedly. We're creating systems that evolve faster than threats can map them. The work was exhausting but fulfilling in a way that her consulting role had never been. This wasn't about advising from a distance. It was about fundamentally transforming how critical infrastructure was protected at a national level. 6 weeks into the implementation, Olivia was working late in her temporary office at the facility when Keller appeared in her doorway. "The President would like to thank you personally," he said without preamble. "Tomorrow morning at the White House." Olivia looked up from her work, her expression troubled. "I appreciate the gesture, but I've been clear about maintaining my anonymity. This isn't about publicity, Olivia. It's about recognition at the highest level for work that has likely prevented a catastrophic attack on our infrastructure. Just the President, key security officials, and you. No press, no announcements." The Oval Office was smaller than Olivia had imagined, more intimate and human-scaled than it appeared in photographs. The President rose from behind the desk as she was escorted in, coming around to greet her directly rather than maintaining the formal barrier. "Dr. Brenner, thank you for coming. Robert has briefed me on your work, both the current infrastructure protection initiatives and your earlier contributions to aviation security." For the next hour, Olivia found herself engaged in a thoughtful discussion about security philosophy. That went far beyond the political talking points she had expected. The President asked insightful questions about predictive security modeling, about the balance between protection and surveillance, about the ethical implications of anticipatory security measures. "Your mother's vision was revolutionary," the President said as their meeting concluded. "She understood something fundamental about security that most experts still haven't grasped, that it's not just about technology or protocols, but about understanding human behavior well enough to anticipate it." As Olivia prepared to leave, the President handed her a small box. "This isn't for public display, but I wanted you to have it as a token of the nation's gratitude." Inside was the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, inscribed simply, "To Catherine and Olivia Brenner, they saw what others couldn't." "Your mother's name belongs there alongside yours," the President said. Quietly, "Her vision, your implementation. Together you've transformed how this nation protects its people." That evening, as Olivia flew back to Chicago, she held the medal in her hand, feeling its weight and significance. Her mother had never sought recognition or acclaim. She had simply tried to make people safer by looking beyond conventional security paradigms. In honoring both of them together, the President had understood something essential about their shared legacy. Back in her university office the following week, Olivia resumed her teaching duties with a renewed sense of purpose. The experience of leading the infrastructure assessment team had changed her perspective on her own role in continuing her mother's work. Her graduate seminar that semester focused on integrated threat perception, teaching future security. Specialists see beyond the artificial boundaries between security domains. Her students, unaware of her recent work with national infrastructure protection, were nonetheless inspired by her ability to help them recognize patterns that crossed conventional categories. "Security thinking has become too specialized," she told them during one lecture. "We train experts to look deeply within their domains, but rarely teach them to look broadly across domains. The most dangerous vulnerabilities exist in the spaces between our systems, not within them." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "But how do you train yourself to see connections that others miss? Is it an innate ability or something that can be learned?" Olivia smiled, remembering her mother asking her the same question years before. "It's both. Some people naturally see patterns more easily than others. But everyone can learn to look differently at information, to question the categories we use to organize threats, to consider how separate systems might interact in ways we haven't anticipated." After class, the student approached Olivia's desk, hesitant but determined. Dr. Brenner, I've been reading about the Guardian system that revolutionized aviation security a few years ago. Was that based on your mother's work? Olivia studied the young woman thoughtfully. Yes, it was. Catherine Brenner designed security systems that could anticipate threats rather than just react to them. Why do you ask? I've been working on a thesis about predictive security modeling in public health systems, how we might identify potential epidemics before they emerge rather than just responding to outbreaks. Everyone tells me it's too ambitious, that health security doesn't work that way. Olivia felt a surge of recognition. This was exactly how her mother had been dismissed when she first proposed anticipatory security frameworks for aviation. What's your name? Maya Patel. Well, Maya, sometimes the most important. Security innovations come from people willing to question conventional boundaries. I'd be interested in seeing your research. Over the following months, Olivia found herself mentoring Maya with an intensity that surprised her colleagues. She saw in the young graduate student the same determination, the same willingness to challenge established security paradigms that had defined her mother's career. As Maya's thesis developed, it became clear that she was onto something significant, a methodology for identifying potential disease outbreaks by recognizing subtle pattern shifts across seemingly unrelated public health indicators. This is extraordinary work, Olivia told her during one of their weekly meetings. You're doing exactly what security analysis should do, looking for connections that others miss because they're focused too narrowly. I couldn't have developed it without your guidance, Maya replied. Everyone else wanted me to narrow my focus, to look at specific disease vectors or geographical regions. You were the only one who encouraged me to look more broadly, Olivia smiled. I had a good teacher. My mother always said that security isn't about building perfect systems. It's about understanding that imperfection is inevitable and building systems that can anticipate and adapt to those imperfections. As Maya's graduation approached, her thesis began attracting attention from public health agencies and security analysts alike. Her predictive model for epidemic identification was being considered for implementation by the CDC as part of their early warning systems. At the graduation ceremony, Olivia watched with pride as Maya received her doctorate, knowing that another generation was carrying forward the security philosophy that Catherine Brenner had pioneered, looking beyond conventional boundaries to see the patterns that others missed. After the ceremony, Maya found Olivia among the crowd of faculty and families. I've been offered a position with the CDC's Emerging Threats Division, she said excitedly. They want me to implement my predictive model as part of their global monitoring system. That's wonderful news, Olivia replied. Your work deserves to be implemented at that scale. Maya hesitated before continuing. There's something else. They mentioned that the position would involve working with the Catherine Brenner Foundation on integrated security frameworks. Is that your mother's foundation? Olivia nodded. Yes, the foundation supports work that crosses traditional security boundaries, exactly the kind of integrated approach your research represents. Did you recommend me? Maya asked. I didn't have to, Olivia said with a smile. Your work speaks for itself. But I did tell my father, who chairs the foundation, that your approach to public health security reflects the same philosophy my mother brought to aviation security. As they parted, Maya handed Olivia a small package. Graduation gift for my mentor, she said with a smile. Inside was a leather-bound journal, similar to the one Olivia had carried for years, with an inscription on the first page. For Dr. Brenner, who taught me to see the patterns others miss. Thank you for showing me that the most important security innovations happen in the spaces between established systems. That evening, Olivia sat in her apartment, looking out at the Chicago skyline as darkness fell and lights began to illuminate the city. Somewhere in that complex urban ecosystem, Guardian-based systems were quietly working, protecting transportation hubs, monitoring critical infrastructure, anticipating potential threats before they emerged. She opened Maya's gift and made her first entry in the new journal. Day 2190. The work continues in new hands now. Mom's vision has taken root not just in technology, but in a new generation of security thinkers who understand that protection isn't about perfect barriers, but about anticipating how those barriers will be tested. Maya will carry this forward in ways even Mom couldn't have imagined. As she closed the journal, Olivia felt a sense of completion. 8 years of watching from seat 12A had led to 3 years of implementing her mother's vision across multiple security domains. Now, through her teaching and mentoring, that vision was evolving beyond what either of them could have anticipated. The quiet passenger in 12A had not only prevented a hijacking and transformed aviation security, she had fundamentally changed how the next generation would think about protection in an interconnected world. Not through fame or authority, but through the patient work of helping others see what had always been visible to those willing to look beyond conventional boundaries. In security centers around the world, Olivia Brenner's philosophy lived on, not just in the systems that bore her name, but in the minds of analysts and specialists who had learned to see the patterns that existed in the spaces between. When historians of national security wrote about the transformation of protective systems in the early decades of the 21st century, they inevitably focused on the technology, the advanced algorithms, the integrated monitoring frameworks, the adaptive threat response mechanisms that revolutionized how nations safeguarded their people. But those who understood security at its deepest level knew that the true revolution wasn't technological at all, it was philosophical. 5 years after the thwarted hijacking of Flight 2317, the Guardian approach had evolved far beyond its aviation origins. The Olivia Brenner Foundation had grown into a global think tank, promoting integrated security thinking across domains traditionally kept separate. Healthcare systems now employed predictive modeling to identify potential outbreaks before they emerged. Environmental protection agencies used adaptive monitoring to anticipate contamination risks rather than just measuring existing pollution. Even education systems had begun implementing frameworks that could identify student vulnerability patterns before they manifested as learning crises. At Northwestern University, Olivia Brenner's seminar on cross-domain security analysis had become legendary. Graduate students from around the world competed for the 20 available spots each semester, knowing that those who learned directly from her gained not just knowledge, but a transformative perspective on what security truly meant. True security isn't about perfect protection, she would tell each new class, but about understanding vulnerability well enough to anticipate how it will be exploited and adapting faster than those who would exploit it. On a brilliant spring morning, as Olivia prepared for her final seminar of the academic year, University President Dr. Eleanor Walsh appeared in her doorway. "Olivia, do you have a moment?" They walked across the campus together, the lake breeze carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers as students hurried to classes or lounged on the lawn studying in the sunshine. "The Board of Trustees has approved our proposal," Walsh said, when they reached a quiet spot overlooking the water. "The Olivia Brenner Center for Integrated Security Studies will open next fall. We'd like you to serve as its founding director." Olivia watched a sailboat tacking across the lake, its course adjusting constantly to the changing wind. "I've always preferred teaching to administration," she said after a moment. "This wouldn't be traditional administration," Walsh countered. "We're envisioning something revolutionary, a center that breaks down the artificial boundaries between security domains, just as your mother's work did. Cybersecurity specialists working alongside public health experts, environmental protection researchers collaborating with transportation safety engineers, all learning to see the interconnections that define true vulnerability in complex systems." The vision Walsh described resonated deeply with everything Olivia had been working toward since that day on Flight 2317, when she'd finally acted on her mother's warnings. "I'd still teach," she said, not quite a question. Walsh smiled. "You'd be the heart of the teaching program. But you'd also guide the center's research agenda, shape its philosophical approach, build connections with implementation partners around the world." That evening, Olivia called her father, who had transformed in his retirement from a quiet engineering professor into a passionate advocate for his late wife's security. "Philosophy. The university wants to establish a center in Mom's name," she explained. "They want me to lead it." Michael Brenner was silent for a moment before responding. "Your mother never wanted institutions or buildings named after her. She just wanted people to understand that security means looking beyond what's comfortable to see what's actually there. That's exactly what this center would do, Dad. Not just honor her name, but advance her vision, teaching people to see across the artificial boundaries we create." Another pause then. "She would be proud. Liv, not of the name on the building, but of how far you've carried her ideas." The Catherine Brenner Center for Integrated Security Studies opened on a perfect September morning, exactly 6 years after Flight 2317. The modest building, designed to facilitate collaboration rather than impress with grandeur, quickly became a hub for innovative security thinking that transcended traditional domains. Under Olivia's guidance, the center developed 3 core programs: an interdisciplinary academic curriculum that taught security specialists to work across traditional boundaries, a research initiative that identified emerging vulnerabilities in the spaces between established security domains, and an implementation partnership program that helped organizations apply integrated security thinking to real-world challenges. The work was demanding but deeply fulfilling. For the first time, Olivia found herself fully embracing a public role as the center's director, no longer content to influence from the shadows, but determined to actively shape how the next generation thought about security. "My mother understood something fundamental that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate," she explained during the center's first international symposium. "Security isn't a state to be achieved, but a dynamic relationship to be maintained. We're not building perfect barriers, we're creating adaptive systems that evolve alongside the threats they address." As the center's reputation grew, Olivia began receiving invitations to consult on integrated security frameworks around the world. The quiet passenger from seat 12A, who had once gone to extraordinary lengths to remain anonymous, now found herself reluctantly stepping into the spotlight as a leading voice in security philosophy. She accepted these opportunities selectively, prioritizing projects that truly embraced the integrated approach rather than those seeking a superficial association with the Brenner name. A hospital network in Singapore implementing predictive health security monitoring. A transportation authority in Stockholm developing adaptive safety systems. A regional environmental protection initiative in Kenya using integrated monitoring to anticipate contamination risks. But of all the center's growing initiatives, the one closest to Olivia's heart was the Emerging Analysts program, identifying and mentoring promising security thinkers who showed an aptitude for seeing across traditional boundaries. Young specialists like Maya Patel, who was now leading the CDC's groundbreaking work in predictive outbreak identification. 3 years into the center's operation, as Olivia was reviewing applications for the upcoming cohort of emerging analysts, her assistant interrupted with an urgent message. "Dr. Brenner, the National Security Advisor, is on line 1. He says it's about an emerging situation that requires your immediate attention." Robert Keller, still serving in his role despite a change in administration, wasted no time with pleasantries. "Olivia, we're seeing something unusual across multiple security domains. Subtle pattern shifts that don't quite rise to the level of threats individually, but collectively suggest a coordinated probing of our integrated systems." Someone's testing Guardian, Olivia said immediately, understanding the implications. Not just testing it, learning from it, Keller replied. Whatever this is, it's adaptive. When our systems adjust to one pattern, the probing shifts to exploit different interconnections. It's like it's studying our response methodology. Send me everything you have, Olivia said, already clearing her schedule. And get me secure transport to Washington by tonight. The secure facility where they had once analyzed the infrastructure vulnerability probes had been expanded into the National Center for Integrated Threat Assessment, a direct result of Olivia's work 5 years earlier. As she walked through the enhanced security protocols, familiar faces greeted her with a mixture of respect and relief. Dr. Brenner, thank you for coming, said General Marcus Blackwell, the center's director. We've assembled the assessment team per your recommendations, with specialists from every major security domain. The briefing room was filled with analysts representing 12 different security specialties: cybersecurity, public health, transportation, energy, environmental protection, food safety, financial systems, and more. On the central display, data points from across these domains revealed subtle anomalies that individually would have been dismissed as noise, but collectively formed a disturbing pattern. What we're seeing isn't just probing for vulnerabilities, Olivia explained after studying the data. It's a systematic mapping of our security response architecture, learning how our integrated systems identify and adapt to threats. A cybersecurity specialist raised her hand. With all due respect, Dr. Brenner, that would require a level of coordination across multiple threat actors that we've never seen before. Or a single entity that understands integrated security as well as we do, Olivia countered. Remember, the Guardian approach isn't classified. The basic principles have been published in academic journals, presented at international conferences, taught in university programs around the world. She walked to the display and began reorganizing the data points, not by security domain, but by response methodology. Look at the pattern here. These aren't random probes. They're systematic tests of specific response approaches. Whoever is behind this understands not just our security systems, but our security philosophy. Over the next 2 weeks, Olivia led the assessment team through the most comprehensive analysis of the nation's integrated security response architecture ever conducted. They mapped not just the systems themselves, but the methodologies that connected them, the philosophical approaches that guided their development, the adaptive responses that had emerged through years of implementation. What they discovered was both fascinating and troubling. The pattern of probes revealed a sophisticated attempt to create a comprehensive model of the Guardian approach, not to defeat it directly, but to understand it deeply enough to predict its responses. It's like they're creating a shadow version of our integrated security framework, Olivia explained during a briefing with senior officials. Not to break through it, but to anticipate how it will adapt to emerging threats. Who would have both the capability and motivation to do something like this? Asked the Homeland Security Secretary. That's the most interesting part, Olivia replied. The methodology doesn't match any known threat actor or nation-state approach. It's more like academic research. She pulled up a series of recent publications from security journals around the world, papers analyzing the philosophical underpinnings of integrated security frameworks, the adaptive methodologies of cross-domain threat assessment, the predictive modeling approaches pioneered by Catherine Brenner and evolved through Guardian implementations. Someone is conducting the security equivalent of pure research, she continued. Not attacking our systems, but studying them, learning from them, perhaps even trying to improve upon them. The implications were profound. For years, the United States had led the world in integrated security thinking, from the original Guardian aviation implementation to the comprehensive infrastructure protection frameworks now in place. But that leadership was being challenged, not through direct conflict, but through intellectual engagement studying. learning, potentially evolving the approach in new directions. So what do we do? Asked Keller. How do we respond to someone mapping our security philosophy rather than attacking our security systems? Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she smiled. We invite them to the conversation. Her proposal was radical but compelling. Rather than treating the systematic probing as a threat to be countered, she suggested approaching it as an opportunity for collaborative advancement of security thinking. The best way to understand who's behind this and what they're trying to accomplish is to engage directly, she explained. We publish a comprehensive analysis of what we've observed, acknowledge the sophisticated methodology behind it, and invite whoever is responsible to participate in an international symposium on the future of integrated security frameworks. The idea met with initial skepticism but gradually gained support as officials recognized its potential. Rather than escalating into a security confrontation, they could potentially transform the situation into a collaborative advancement of global security thinking. 3 months later, the Olivia Brenner Center for Integrated Security Studies hosted the first international symposium on adaptive security frameworks. Security specialists from around the world gathered to discuss the evolution of integrated approaches to protection across traditional domain boundaries. The keynote address, delivered by Olivia herself, directly acknowledged the sophisticated probing that had been detected across U.S. security systems. To whoever has been conducting this remarkable study of our integrated security architecture, she said to the packed auditorium, I want to say this. Your methodology reveals a deep understanding of what security truly means in an interconnected world. We recognize your work not as a threat, but as a significant contribution to evolving security thinking. We invite you to join this conversation openly to help us collectively advance the science and philosophy of protection in a complex world. The response came not during the conference but 3 weeks later in the form of a scholarly paper, submitted simultaneously to 12 leading security journals around the world. Titled, Adaptive Evolution in Integrated Security Frameworks, Lessons from the Guardian Model, the paper presented a sophisticated analysis of how predictive security systems could be evolved to address emerging threats across traditional domain boundaries. The authors were a previously unknown research collective called the Global Security Evolution Group, comprising specialists from 23 countries who had been collaboratively studying integrated security approaches for years. We have been learning from your systems, their accompanying message to Olivia stated, not to defeat them but to understand and advance them. Security is not zero-sum. The protection of human systems transcends national boundaries and political divisions. We believe the next evolution of integrated security must be truly global, collaborative, and open source. The proposal they outlined was revolutionary and international collaborative framework for developing and implementing integrated security approaches that could be adapted to protect people around the world, regardless of nationality or political affiliation. 6 months later, Olivia found herself addressing the United Nations General Assembly, presenting a vision for global security collaboration that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The threats we face today, from pandemics to climate disasters, from infrastructure vulnerabilities to emerging technologies, don't respect national boundaries, she told the assembled delegates. Our approach to security must evolve beyond isolated national systems to embrace truly integrated global frameworks that protect people wherever they live. The initiative that emerged, known as the Global Guardian Framework, represented a fundamental shift in how nations approach security. Rather than guarding their protective methodologies as national advantages, participating countries began sharing approaches, collaborating on implementations, and collectively evolving more effective systems for anticipating and addressing threats across traditional boundaries. At the heart of this revolution in security thinking was a philosophical principle that Olivia Brenner had articulated years earlier: True security isn't about building perfect barriers, but about understanding vulnerability well enough to anticipate how it will be exploited and adapting faster than those who would exploit it. 10 years after Flight 2317, Olivia stood at the entrance to the newly completed Global Security Collaboration Center in Geneva. The striking building, with its transparent design symbolizing the open exchange of security thinking, would serve as the headquarters for the international effort to develop and implement integrated protection frameworks around the world. As she watched delegates from dozens of nations arriving for the inaugural session, Olivia felt a profound sense of how far security thinking had evolved from the days when her mother's warnings had been dismissed as paranoid. Robert Keller, now retired from government service but serving as a senior advisor to the Global Guardian Initiative, joined her at the entrance. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly, "not just of the building or the program, but of how completely her vision has been embraced." Olivia smiled. She never wanted recognition. She just wanted people to be safer because security thinkers were willing to look beyond comfortable assumptions to see actual vulnerabilities. "And now that approach is being implemented globally," Keller replied. Because one passenger in Seat 12A refused to stop watching when everyone else had stopped looking. Inside the center's main atrium stood a simple memorial, not a statue or grand monument, but a transparent column containing artifacts from the evolution of integrated security thinking. Catherine Brenner's original Guardian implementation. Diagrams. The leather notebook in which Olivia had documented 8 years of flight observations. The authentication code transmission from Flight 2317 that had finally validated Catherine's warnings. Beside the memorial, a simple inscription captured the philosophy that had transformed global security. The most dangerous vulnerabilities exist not within our systems, but between them. True security comes not from perfect protection, but from the courage to see what others miss and the wisdom to adapt faster than threats can evolve. As the delegates gathered for the opening session, Olivia took her place at the podium, no longer the invisible passenger from Seat 12A, but the architect of a global revolution in how humanity approached the protection of its most vital systems. 10 years ago, she began, a potential tragedy was averted because someone was willing to watch for patterns that others had stopped looking for. Today, we formalize a global commitment to that kind of vigilance, not just within our individual nations or security domains, but across the artificial boundaries we've created. She paused, looking out at the faces of security specialists from around the world who had gathered to launch this unprecedented collaboration. "My mother used to say that security isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a dynamic relationship that requires constant attention, adaptation, and evolution. The Global Guardian framework we launched today isn't a finished solution, but the beginning of a new approach to how we protect what matters most." As she continued outlining the principles that would guide the international collaboration, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the quiet passenger observing patterns that others missed, to the reluctant hero who prevented a hijacking, to the teacher who helped others see across traditional boundaries, to the architect of a global security revolution, each step had been guided by a simple commitment to seeing what was actually there rather than what was comfortable to acknowledge. That evening, after the formal proceedings had concluded, Olivia walked alone through the quiet streets of Geneva, thinking about her mother's journey from dismissed prophet to vindicated visionary. Catherine Brenner had never lived to see her security philosophy embraced, but her daughter had carried that vision forward until the world was ready to see what she had always seen. In her hotel room, Olivia opened the original leather notebook that had accompanied her on 1,247 flights in Seat 12A. She made a final entry. Day 3650. The watching has become global now. Not just one passenger observing patterns, but security. Thinkers around the world committed to seeing across the boundaries we create. Mom always said that true security comes from the courage to acknowledge vulnerability and the wisdom to adapt before threats can exploit it. Today, that philosophy became the foundation for how humanity will protect itself in an interconnected world. The passenger in 12A can finally rest. She closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand, knowing it would return to the Global Security Collaboration Center's memorial the next day, a reminder that revolutions in thinking often begin with one person willing to see what others miss. The Global Guardian framework would evolve over the coming years, adapting to new threats, incorporating emerging technologies, embracing contributions from security thinkers around the world. But its core philosophy would remain constant, true. Protection comes not from perfect barriers, but from understanding vulnerability well enough to anticipate how it will be exploited, and adapting faster than those who would exploit it. In security centers and implementation sites around the world, Olivia Brenner's vision lived on, not just in the systems and frameworks that bore her name, but in the minds of analysts and specialists who had learned to look beyond comfortable assumptions to see the patterns that existed in the spaces between. When security historians wrote about this transformation in protective thinking, they would focus on the technological innovations, the international agreements, the institutional frameworks that made global collaboration possible. But those who understood security at its deepest level knew that the true revolution had begun years earlier, with a quiet passenger in seat 12A who refused to stop watching when everyone else had stopped looking. Olivia Brenner wasn't a spy or a soldier or a famous security expert. She was a daughter who understood that some warnings are too important to ignore, a teacher who helped others see across artificial boundaries, and a visionary who transformed how humanity protects what matters most. And in the end, that was enough to change everything. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.